Report into the impact of the Women's Euros has revealed that 365 million people watched the tournament across the world. 575,000 fans attended matches across England, and the report says 85% of those are likely to go to women's football matches again in the future.
From the ban in 1921 to the dizzying heights of the most recent international tournaments, it's clear to see that the women's game has taken a huge stride in not only influence for mainstream media, but also for people all around the world. The growth and trajectory of the sport as of recent has been absolutely phenomenal. However, this didn't come without many hardships over the past century.
Women's football in the 1920s was extremely popular, but the Football Association wanted to actively discourage it.
I think the FA banned women's football in 1921 after they'd drawn crowds up to 55,000, and I think what they wanted to do was protect all the revenue streams for men's football.
Throughout the past few months, I've been doing some research into the influence of women's football on people and just the growth in the media overall, from the history to the dizzying heights of the recent events that have went on in the sport. Today, I thought I would share that all, along with getting a few interviews with some people who were involved in the sport. Women's football may have been played for as long as men's football, with records in Scotland for women's games dating all the way back to the 1790s. And in 1863, governing bodies who regulated football introduced standardised laws to prohibit some violent acts on the pitch, supposedly deeming it more appropriate for women to play the sport. Hibernian Park in Edinburgh would see the first international women's game being played. The British Ladies Football Club would also be established in 1894 to try and increase the reputation of the women's game. However, it was opposed by a lot of the British public due to the apparent masculine features and reputation the game had had. However, this would not stop the overall growth in the sport in the beginning of the 20th century, as record-breaking crowds for the game would be established. However, this would all come to a stop in 1921, where the FA would pass a law to prohibit any women's game being played on associate members' pitches. The apparent reasoning for this was that football was not an appropriate sport for women and should not have been encouraged. The ban of professional women's football in England would last nearly 50 years. However, this would all change after the 1966 Men's World Cup, in where England would win it. And due to the widespread popularity of football in general, the calls were for women's football to return in a professional way. This would mean that the Women's Football Association would be established 3 years after the 1966 World Cup, and would oversee the creation of a Women's England team and a Premier League team. And then, 2 years after the establishment of the Women's Football Association, in 1971, the FA would remove its restrictions on the playing rights for women's teams. And realistically, from there, the rest is history. Women's football has been on the rise ever since the resurrection from the ban in the 1970s, and 2022 was a particular year of record-breaking numbers in terms of statistics and achievements for the sport. This was around the time where Euro 2022 for the women was being played, and in terms of statistics of that tournament, over 574,000 tickets were sold. That was more than double of the previous competition. In terms of the final, where England would go on to beat Germany, 87,000 tickets were sold at Wembley, which is a record-breaking number by far for the sport, which was absolutely phenomenal to see, and it really does show the growth of the sport overall. The Women's Super League and the Women's Championship have also seen record-breaking numbers that are continuing to be broken as we speak. In terms of the 22-23 season, there was a Super League record of over 47,000 fans at the Emirates Stadium. Arsenal set a record for the most viewed British attendance record in their Champions League semi-final tie against German club Wolfsburg, with a crowd of more than 60,000 spectators, which again shows the growth of the sport. And then you had the 2023 Women's World Cup, where altogether nearly 2 million fans watched the 64 matches played, which was more than 500,000 of the previous records of the Women's World Cup, which continues to prove that the women's game is not only growing at a consistent rate, but also it is growing at a rapid rate. However, women's football does unfortunately still receive backlash and vile comments from people on social media and in person, which is why HerGameToo was established to hopefully get rid and eradicate sexism in football and allow everyone to enjoy the game, whether it be on the pitch or off the pitch in different roles. Many people volunteer to HerGameToo in order to help the cause of ending sexism in football, and football clubs themselves are also partners with HerGameToo, and this really does help get the message out there that football should be a game for all.
I'm Josh Woods and I'm the voice of Kilmarnock Women's Football Club.
Do you think, of course, the topic of social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything else in between, has more of a positive or a negative light in terms of the promotion and kind of just influence on the women's game?
Well, of course, social media has a huge impact on football in general at the moment. And it's really what brings fans closer to the team, I'd say. So it has a great impact on it, and it will really help the development of women's sports.
Women's football commercially, including the Euros, the World Cup, everything else in between, it's had absolutely record-breaking numbers for women's football, and even contest with men's football and the statistics and these kind of things in terms of numbers. So how do you see the kind of growth of the sport commercially progressing the more time goes on, the more these events kind of get advertised?
Well, it's these big events, they're broadcasted everywhere, so there's so much more viewers, and especially for the younger generation that would like to seek a career in women's sports. It's such a big opener for them, getting to be able to watch it all live happening right at the moment. It's amazing, yeah, it really is.
So in terms of, commercially, once again, of course, you have all the licensing, all the people that are stream women's football. Do you think they kind of provide enough, whether that be financially, whether it be exposure-wise, to be able to promote the women's game further, whether that be to, more people who may want to watch the sport, or maybe younger people that will want to get into the sport in the future?
Well, I think that there's a good bit of money getting put into women's sports at the moment, but not enough to really get people that never had an interest in it involved. Obviously, you do need to think about the licensing when it comes into streams, but it is starting to get broadcast across the board a good bit now.
Question here: if we are to think far into the future, if we say everything goes right, we know the growth, people start watching it more. What do you think realistically the peak could be for women's football? Is it one of the things where it can be a global sport? Not that it already is, but even more of a global sport, watched equally as much, if not more, than the men's game? Or is it a thing as well where it can be built up in the grassroots levels as well, in the similar way to men's football? Of course, there's countless divisions in men's football, from grassroots all the way up. Do you think it'll be a thing that women's football can inspire younger women of kind of all abilities and levels to have the dream of playing football and achieving that?
Yeah, well, of course, even looking at men's football, it happens the same, and there's such a big opportunity for women's football to get rid of the competition between men's football and women's football at the moment. But from what I know from the league announced, we have the two main leagues, and then under that you have the lower divisions. I'm sure it's similar to that in men's football as well. So we are really getting there, but when it comes to the kind of public face of it, there's a lot of negative comments, but the negative comments really can't little the developments getting put into women's football, because it has so much expansion opportunities. It's just about finding them and taking them.
100%, and I really hope that the potential of women's football continues to grow. I'm sure it will, and I'd hope that one day these kind of things where we have to have these discussions of how do you make women's football equally as competitive to men's, or even just women's sports?
Yeah.
I'm sure one day, it'll be a thing where these kind of things grow at similar rates, and it'll be less of a discussion. It's how do we get both kind of teams involved and get them all working together, which I'm sure they are now, but there's definitely levels for improvement there, I'd say.
Yeah.